This chapter is not in chronological order. The events written here took place much later. When we read the text in a few moments, we will read about a new king in Babylon named Belshazzar. Who was he? Well, for many years, Bible critics used this chapter to prove that Daniel was not one of the prophetic books and had been written hundreds of years later. They said there were no outside documents to support Daniel's claim and that there was no king named Belshazzar. That is until the discovery of the Nabonidus cylinders. Ancient historians did not have paper like we have today, so they would record their documents on clay tablets, or in that day on cylinders. Lance, there should be a picture up there for this. There you go. The Nabonidus cylinder is a historical text written about King Nabonidus of Babylon, who ruled from 536 to 539 BC. Don't be confused by these dates, by the way. They go, the higher date is farther back, then finally we get to the life of Christ, and then it starts going in the direction that we're used to today, where the numbers add up. This cylinder describes how he repaired a tower in Babylon, which was next to the Babylonian temple, and it dates from around 540 BC. The Nabonidus cylinder is from Ur of the Chaldees, which records the name of Belshazzar as one of the kings of Babylon. Belshazzar was actually a sub-king under his father Nabonidus. Now, if Ur of the Chaldees sounds familiar to you, this is the place where Abraham originally came from. You can read about that in Genesis chapter 15. Upon the death of Nebuchadnezzar, his only son, Evil-Merodach, took over the throne in about 561 BC. Evil-Merodach was murdered by Nergal-Sharezer. These names are a little hard for us to pronounce. Why didn't they use names like Jason and Nathan and things like that, right? Nergal-Sharezer was married to one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters, and he replaced Evil-Merodach as the king in 559 BC. Nergal-Sharezer was succeeded on the throne by his younger son, who reigned only a few months before he was murdered by Nabonidus, who was the husband of another one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters. So during the time of the events that are recorded here in chapter 5, Nabonidus was away from Babylon fighting in the field of battle, while Belshazzar, his son, remained in Babylon as his co-regent. Nabonidus was the last ruler of the Babylonian Empire. Jeremiah prophesied that this would happen. In Jeremiah 27, verses 6 and 7, we have this. And now I have given all these lands into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant. And the beasts of the fields I have also given him to serve him. So all nations shall serve him and his son's son, until the time of this land comes. And then many nations and great kings shall make him serve them. The Babylonian kingdom was prophesied to last through the reign of his son and then the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. Afterwards, the Babylonian kingdom would come to an end. Now, during Belshazzar's feast, the city was under siege by Gobryas. He was the Median general, the general of the Medes. History tells us that they took the city by diverting the flow of a canal that was through the city, thus letting the army go through in the waterway under the walls. I'll tell you a little bit more about that next week when we talk about the conquest by Cyrus. It seems foolish that Belshazzar would put on such a lavish party while the armies of Gobryas were laying siege to the city. Perhaps Belshazzar thought that the city was impregnable because his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar had fortified the city to withstand any siege. No one could attack them from without. And Babylon was no small city, by the way. The walls were 15 miles on a side. It was a square city, 60 miles around in circumference, constructed of brick, and each wall, now get this, each wall was 350 feet high. That's 35 stories by 10-foot stories as we look at it today. And it was 87 feet thick. It was wide enough for 4 chariots to travel side by side around the city walls. Interesting, isn't it? There's a lot of features about the city I'm going to skip over today, but there were avenues in the inside, wide avenues, one that went around in the whole inside of the wall. There were bridges, there were ferries along the way, and they had a wide moat that also surrounded this city. It was filled with water from the river Euphrates. There was a drawbridge at the front of the gates, and so When they set up the city, they cut a canal from the Euphrates River that went right through the middle of the city, dividing the city into two equal parts. Inside the city, the banks of the river were contained by huge walls and brass gates located at the main avenues across the city. When the gates were opened, the people would take a ferry boat to go to the other side. There were ample supplies of grain and water inside the city that would last for many years. One commentary suggested that they had enough to last the whole city, the number of people that were in there, for over 20 years. Let's look at verses 1 through 4 now. Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. Belshazzar the king made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in the presence of the 1,000. While he tasted the wine, Belshazzar gave the command to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple which had been in Jerusalem, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken from the temple of the house of God, which had been in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze and iron, wood and stone. Oriental dictators loved to host huge banquets which displayed their wealth and splendor. Artaxerxes, the Persian king who married Esther, you read the book of Esther, says in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes and the provinces being before him. Belshazzar's feast focused on the economic system of that time, great wealth, but it also describes the age in which we also live today. John said, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but of the world." And this was the world system at that time and in that day. Don't you see that also operating in our day and age today? I think so. Now, there are at least 4 words that describe Belshazzar's attitude. The first is indulgence. The people asked, "What shall we eat? What shall we drink?" And they were willing to follow anyone who would entertain them and fulfill all of their desires. And that's what the king did. Why worry about the future when you're secure and have plenty to eat? Isn't that great? Belshazzar was also indifferent to the danger of the enemy that was camped just outside the city. He reasoned that since the walls were so high and so thick, and there were defense towers along the walls, how could any army break through the bronze gates and come into the city? There was plenty of water and food. That was all stored within the city, so he had confidence, but that was a false confidence, as we will easily see. There is no wall high enough or army big enough when God decides to make war with you. You know that? The Apostle Paul wrote, "For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them." 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 3. I'm sure that Belshazzar knew about the dream of his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar. He prophesied of the event, to the demise of Babylon, but Belshazzar was indifferent to its fulfillment. He defied the will of God, like so many people do today when they say, "Nothing will shake me. I shall always be happy and never have trouble." It's like one of the characters from David Copperfield. "My ship will come in. It will be a wonderful time. We can look forward to the future," right? That's the way people are looking at it today as well. Nebuchadnezzar, his grandfather, had decreed that everyone was to give respect to the God of the Jews. He praised the Lord for his sovereignty and his greatness. But as the years passed, his words kind of faded away. They were forgotten. And his grandson, Belshazzar, treated Israel's God with arrogant disrespect. He's not going to get away with that, is he? Belshazzar was drunk when he ordered his servants to bring in the consecrated vessels that had been taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Everyone at the feast used these holy vessels as drinking cups while they praised the false gods of Babylon. Did they think that their gods had defeated the God of the Hebrews?